In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Wakanda is known as a nation that chose to hide from the world. But tonight, we will explore a quieter truth behind that legend. The ancient oaths that bound Wakanda to the outside world long before T'Challa, long before vibranium was ever revealed, and long before the world believed Wakanda was real. Long before Wakanda learned to hide its borders from the world, it learned to fear what the world would become. The first memory preserved in Wakandan tradition is not of victory, nor of conquest, but of arrival. The sky burned with a brief and silent fire. A fragment of the heavens struck the soil of eastern Africa and tore open the earth. Vibranium entered the world not as a gift, but as a wound in the land. The early tribes who witnessed the fall did not understand the metal's nature, yet they understood its danger. The earth itself had been changed. Water tasted different near the impact site. Plants grew stronger, but some became poisonous. Animals that fed upon those plants grew restless, aggressive, and difficult to tame. Even before the rise of the panther cult, vibranium altered the balance of the region's natural systems. The land became fertile but unstable. Life flourished, yet it no longer behaved as it once had. The first clans to settle near the impact site learned quickly that vibranium did not only strengthen tools and weapons, it reshaped social order. Those who controlled access to the metal gained power over food production, protection, and trade routes. This led to early conflict between neighboring tribes, each seeking fragments of the fallen star. Wakandan oral history preserves accounts of small wars fought not for territory, but for access to the soil itself. These early conflicts revealed a pattern that would define Wakanda's future. Vibranium did not merely empower, it attracted violence from beyond its borders. Even in ancient times, distant traders and raiders followed rumors of a metal that could not be broken. Wakanda learned that secrecy was not a luxury, it was a defense mechanism formed in response to outside pressure. The unification of the 5 tribes into a single nation did not occur through conquest alone. It was structured around a pact that limited how vibranium could be used beyond Wakandan soil. The early kings, guided by the first Black Panther, created laws that restricted the trade of vibranium to the outside world. These laws were not moral ideals, they were practical survival measures. Early attempts to barter vibranium for livestock and grain had ended in raids, broken agreements, and the return of foreign warriors seeking the source of the metal. Wakanda's elders concluded that vibranium, once known, could not be unlearned by the world. Knowledge itself became a threat vector. Thus, the first external oaths were sworn. No Wakandan was permitted to reveal the true nature of the land beyond its borders. To leave Wakanda was permitted. To speak of vibranium was forbidden. These oaths were not enforced only through punishment. They were woven into spiritual belief. The Panther cult taught that vibranium was a sacred trust given to Wakanda alone. To share it without mandate from the throne was to betray the ancestral spirits. This belief system created a moral structure that aligned secrecy with spiritual duty. Over generations, this reduced the likelihood of betrayal, not through fear of the king, but through fear of losing ancestral favor. The system worked because it bound political law to religious consequence. Wakanda's isolation was not only strategic, it became sacred. As Wakanda's technology advanced, so did the sophistication of its concealment. Early camouflage was simple. Settlements were built away from trade routes. Trails were erased. Travelers were guided around Wakandan territory by carefully maintained illusions of impassable terrain. Later, vibranium-based cloaking systems reshaped entire borders. The nation was no longer merely hidden, it was misrepresented. Wakanda allowed the world to believe it was poor, agrarian, and politically irrelevant. This false image was maintained deliberately. The outside world was permitted to see Wakanda only as a place worth ignoring. This deception was codified into diplomatic behavior. Wakandan envoys who traveled abroad presented themselves as representatives of a small, underdeveloped nation. This was not humiliation. It was camouflage applied to identity itself. The oaths that bound Wakanda to the outside world were not treaties of alliance, they were treaties of silence. Wakanda did not swear to protect foreign nations, it swore to avoid entanglement. In doing so, Wakanda created a system of selective non-intervention. Wars elsewhere were observed, recorded, and studied, but rarely influenced. This shaped Wakandan political philosophy. The nation came to believe that intervention bred dependency, and dependency bred instability. Vibranium made Wakanda powerful, but power carried the risk of reshaping the world into a reflection of Wakandan priorities. The elders feared that if Wakanda began to solve external conflicts, it would eventually be asked to rule external societies. The oath of silence therefore functioned as a boundary against imperial temptation. Over centuries, these principles hardened into tradition. Each new king was required to reaffirm the ancient oaths upon ascending the throne. This ritual was not symbolic, it was legal. The king bound himself to uphold isolation, to protect vibranium's secrecy, and to maintain Wakanda's projected weakness abroad. Breaking these oaths was considered an existential betrayal. The throne was not merely a seat of authority, it was a custodian of restraint. Power in Wakanda was designed to be constrained by inherited rules, not expanded by ambition alone. Yet the oaths also created unintended consequences. By choosing silence, Wakanda accepted ignorance of global suffering as a political posture. This did not mean Wakandans were unaware of the outside world's pain. They studied famine, slavery, and colonial conquest from afar. They chose not to intervene. The system taught that knowledge without action was acceptable if action risked exposure. Over time, this created a moral tension within Wakandan society. Some began to question whether protection of secrecy justified allowing suffering to continue elsewhere. These doubts were recorded in the margins of Wakandan historical archives, preserved but not acted upon. The ancient oaths had created stability, but they had also created distance from responsibility. The ancient oaths did not bind Wakanda to the outside world through alliance. They bound Wakanda to a promise of withdrawal. The nation's relationship with the world was defined by deliberate absence. Wakanda became powerful not only because of vibranium, but because of the discipline required to hide it. The silence chosen in ancient times shaped every institution that followed. Technology, governance, religion, and diplomacy evolved around a single guiding principle: Wakanda would survive by remaining unseen. This silence, however, was not permanent by design. The oaths were crafted to endure until the world changed. The elders believed that one day the outside world would reach a level of stability where vibranium could exist without becoming a catalyst for conquest. The oaths were therefore conditional. They were not meant to last forever. They were meant to last until the world was ready. Wakanda waited, not for permission, but for maturity beyond its borders. The ancient oaths did not freeze Wakanda in time. They required adaptation. As centuries passed, the outside world transformed through cycles of empire, collapse, and rediscovery. Each wave of change pressed against Wakanda's borders in new ways. Traders began to travel farther. Maps grew more precise. The old strategy of physical isolation became insufficient. Wakanda's concealment evolved into an active system of environmental manipulation. The borders learned to breathe, expanding and contracting their visible presence in response to outside pressure. This was not merely technological camouflage. It was a living border doctrine shaped by intelligence gathering, predictive modeling, and ritual oversight by the royal court. The Wakandan Council established a division tasked solely with observing external political patterns. This group studied the rise of foreign empires, not to emulate them, but to predict their paths of expansion. When outside powers grew aggressive, Wakanda's borders became more difficult to traverse. Terrain illusions thickened, trade routes shifted. When empires collapsed, Wakanda allowed controlled contact to resume, not for trade, but for information. This created a feedback loop. Wakanda learned from the world while remaining unseen by it. The oath of silence did not prevent learning. It structured learning into observation without participation. This system taught Wakanda a crucial rule about power transfer. Power that is visible invites challenge. Power that is hidden shapes events without provoking response. Wakandan leaders internalized this principle. The nation's internal development accelerated, while its external profile remained deliberately stagnant. This imbalance allowed Wakanda to surpass surrounding civilizations technologically without triggering invasion. It was not secrecy alone that protected Wakanda. It was strategic asymmetry. The world advanced visibly, Wakanda advanced quietly. Over time, the oaths expanded beyond vibranium secrecy. They began to govern knowledge export itself. Wakandan scholars were forbidden from sharing advanced agricultural methods, medical techniques, or energy systems with outsiders. This was justified through cause and effect reasoning. Even benign technologies, when introduced unevenly, destabilized societies. Wakanda observed how colonial powers used technological gaps to dominate others. The council concluded that selective sharing would replicate the same harm under a different banner. Wakanda's oath, therefore, became a rule of non-distortion. The nation would not reshape the developmental trajectory of others, even through aid. This was not indifference. It was a policy designed to avoid creating dependency structures that would collapse when Wakandan support withdrew. The border tribes played a crucial role in maintaining this system. These tribes acted as cultural interfaces. They adopted outwardly simple lifestyles while maintaining internal access to Wakandan knowledge networks. To outsiders, they appeared as guardians of a poor frontier. Internally, they functioned as sensors, reporting shifts in regional power, migration patterns, and resource conflicts. This dual identity was not deception for its own sake. It was a distributed intelligence network embedded within Wakanda's social fabric. The oath of silence was therefore enforced not only by the throne, but by entire communities trained to exist between worlds without revealing either. Spiritual doctrine evolved alongside this system. The Panther cult reframed isolation not as withdrawal, but as stewardship. Wakanda was taught to view itself as a seed vault of civilization. The belief held that if the world collapsed into chaos, Wakanda's preserved knowledge could restore balance. This created a moral justification for non-intervention. Wakanda did not act because it believed its greatest contribution was preservation, not correction. The system taught that civilizations fall when they attempt to control outcomes beyond their understanding. Wakanda chose to remain an archive of continuity rather than an agent of reform. Yet this belief system introduced a quiet rigidity. The longer Wakanda remained hidden, the more its leaders equated survival with absence. The oath of silence transformed into a reflex. When confronted with external crises, the default response was concealment rather than evaluation. This created institutional inertia. The systems designed to protect Wakanda began to resist change, even when change became strategically necessary. The border doctrine, once adaptive, hardened into tradition. The breathing borders learned to hold their breath. This rigidity shaped Wakanda's internal political culture. Innovation flourished in science, but stagnated in diplomacy. The mechanisms of concealment were refined, yet the moral framework surrounding isolation remained unchanged for generations.
The cause and effect logic that once justified silence now prevented reassessment. The oaths had become self-reinforcing structures. To question them was to challenge the foundation of national identity. Wakanda had survived because of silence. This truth made silence difficult to abandon, even as the world beyond its borders began to change in ways the elders had not anticipated. By the time modern global powers emerged, Wakanda's borders had become more than physical boundaries. They were psychological thresholds. The nation did not merely hide from the world, it understood itself in contrast to the world. The outside was chaos, Wakanda was continuity. This binary simplified governance, but it also narrowed moral imagination. The oaths had protected Wakanda from conquest, yet they had also enclosed it within its own certainty. Still, the system endured because it functioned. Wakanda remained sovereign, vibranium remained uncontested. The world passed by without seeing what it could not understand. The borders continued to breathe, but more slowly now. The ancient oaths still held, yet the pressure against them was increasing. The world was learning to see beyond surfaces. Wakanda could no longer rely solely on being unseen. The longer Wakanda remained unseen, the more silence became a cost rather than a shield. The ancient oaths had preserved sovereignty, yet they had also narrowed the channels through which Wakanda could understand the moral consequences of its absence. As global networks formed beyond Wakanda's borders, suffering became less distant in abstraction and more immediate in record. Wakandan observers documented forced displacement, resource exploitation, and the systematic erasure of cultures. These records were stored within sealed archives, studied by scholars trained to interpret patterns of collapse. The knowledge was precise. The response remained unchanged. The oath of non-intervention overruled compassion when compassion risked exposure. This produced a quiet fracture within Wakandan governance. The council continued to endorse isolation, while a growing number of advisors argued that concealment itself was now shaping external outcomes through inaction. This tension revealed a deeper system governing Wakandan power. Power was not only what Wakanda could do, but what it chose not to do. The oaths transformed restraint into a governing mechanism. By defining non-action as virtue, Wakanda insulated itself from the burden of responsibility. Yet restraint, when practiced without revision, becomes neglect. The elders had believed that the world would one day mature into stability. Instead, the world became interconnected and volatile. Crises spread across borders faster than any single nation could contain. Wakanda's original logic assumed slow change. The new world changed in waves. The oath had not been designed for this speed. This mismatch between ancient design and modern reality exposed a structural flaw in Wakanda's isolation doctrine. The doctrine assumed that concealment prevented harm. It did not account for harm amplified by absence. Wakanda's refusal to share knowledge allowed technological gaps to persist. Those gaps were exploited by powerful states to dominate weaker ones. Wakanda did not cause these imbalances, but it observed them without interference. This passive stance became a form of indirect influence. By withholding stabilizing systems, Wakanda allowed instability to deepen elsewhere. The system of silence had shifted from neutral preservation to consequential omission. Within Wakandan society, this realization produced ideological divergence. Some viewed the oaths as sacred boundaries that could not be altered without unraveling the nation's identity. Others interpreted the oaths as contextual safeguards meant to be re-examined as the world evolved. This debate was not public. It unfolded within closed councils, among scholars, and within the private reflections of the royal family. The Panther cult itself began to interpret ancestral guidance less as fixed law and more as living counsel. The ancestors, in this view, were not demanding eternal silence. They had demanded discernment. Silence had been the discernment of the past. The present required a different measure. This shift reframed Wakanda's understanding of stewardship. The seed vault philosophy, once centered on preservation, began to incorporate conditional engagement. Preservation without relevance risked becoming irrelevance. Wakanda's knowledge systems had grown vast, yet unused beyond its borders. The nation faced a paradox. Its greatest strength lay in continuity, yet continuity isolated it from participating in the very history it was preserving. Wakanda had become an archive of humanity that humanity could not access. The oaths had turned the nation into a witness without agency. The mechanisms of concealment also began to strain under modern surveillance. Satellites observed terrain changes. Global intelligence agencies mapped anomalies. Wakanda's cloaking systems adapted, but each adaptation increased the complexity of maintaining invisibility. The border doctrine now required constant technological innovation to sustain a lie that grew more fragile with each passing decade. Concealment became an active burden. Wakanda could no longer rely on being overlooked. It had to continuously outpace observation. This created a feedback loop. The more Wakanda hid, the more sophisticated its hiding systems became, and the more resources were diverted from outward engagement to inward defense of secrecy. The price of silence was therefore measured in opportunity cost. Wakanda invested vast intellectual and material capital into remaining unseen. Those same resources could have stabilized regions, prevented conflicts, or reshaped global development trajectories. The Oaths had been designed to protect Wakanda from conquest. They were now consuming the energy that could have allowed Wakanda to participate in shaping a less violent world. This realization did not immediately dissolve the Oaths. It altered how they were perceived. The Oaths were no longer merely protective, they were restrictive frameworks that required reinterpretation. The first internal breaches of absolute silence were not acts of rebellion, they were acts of calibration. Wakandan outreach began in covert forms. Limited intelligence sharing occurred through intermediaries. Select medical interventions were performed anonymously in regions facing collapse. These actions were structured to avoid attribution. Wakanda tested whether engagement could occur without exposure. This experimentation revealed another system governing Wakandan power. Influence did not require visibility. It required leverage points within existing structures. Wakanda learned to shape outcomes indirectly, guiding events without announcing presence. The Oaths evolved from absolute silence into selective invisibility. This evolution did not resolve the core tension. The ancient Oaths had bound Wakanda to absence as a form of virtue. The modern world demanded presence to prevent cascading harm. Wakanda stood between two identities, one defined by restraint, the other by responsibility.
The silence that had once preserved the nation now demanded a cost in moral authority. Wakanda could no longer remain untouched by the consequences of its withdrawal. The Oaths still held in form, but their meaning was shifting beneath them. The ancient Oaths endured until silence failed in a way that could not be hidden. For generations, Wakanda had managed the tension between concealment and consequence through quiet calibration. The nation influenced events indirectly, maintained borders that learned to breathe, and adjusted doctrine without openly abandoning tradition. This balance collapsed when vibranium was taken beyond Wakandan control. The extraction was not an accident, it was the result of a long chain of compromises within Wakanda's own systems. The border doctrine had allowed controlled contact. Intelligence gathering had required external observation posts. The more Wakanda studied the world, the more points of contact it created. Each point of contact carried risk. Over time, that risk compounded into vulnerability. When vibranium entered foreign hands, it shattered the foundational assumption of the ancient Oaths. The Oaths had been built on containment. Once containment failed, silence became meaningless. Wakanda could no longer rely on invisibility to protect what had already been exposed. The system governing vibranium security had been designed to prevent discovery, not to manage proliferation. This revealed a structural limitation in Wakanda's power architecture. Wakanda had mastered secrecy, it had not prepared for shared governance. The Oaths had constrained development of external governance frameworks for vibranium because such frameworks assumed disclosure. Once disclosure occurred, Wakanda lacked institutional mechanisms for regulation beyond its borders. This failure reframed Wakanda's relationship with the outside world from one of absence to one of unavoidable presence. Vibranium in foreign hands created new cause and effect chains. Technologies built with it altered military balances. Conflicts escalated in intensity. Wakanda observed outcomes it could no longer influence indirectly. The seed vault philosophy broke under the weight of immediacy. Preservation without engagement could no longer contain the consequences of shared material. The oaths, designed to prevent such exposure, had failed at their primary function. This did not invalidate their intent, it revealed their incompleteness. The response within Wakanda was not immediate unity. The council fractured along interpretive lines.
One faction argued that the breach proved the necessity of returning to stricter isolation. Borders should close further, contact should be severed, information should be reduced. This faction viewed exposure as contamination. The opposing faction argued that isolation had produced the vulnerability. The lack of external governance structures had allowed vibranium, once exposed, to move without Wakandan influence. The oaths, in their original form, had prevented Wakanda from building international frameworks that could have constrained vibranium's misuse. Silence had protected Wakanda until the moment it did not. At that moment, silence became impotence. The throne stood between these positions. The Black Panther's role was no longer merely custodial. It became interpretive. The oaths had been passed down as fixed law. Now they required rewriting. This was not a rejection of ancestral authority. It was an application of ancestral logic. The ancestors had demanded discernment in the face of existential threat. The threat had changed, therefore discernment had to change. The oath was rewritten not as an abandonment of secrecy, but as a conditional transformation of it. Wakanda would no longer define protection solely through absence. It would define protection through managed presence. This redefinition introduced a new governing system for Wakandan power. Power would now be transferred outward under controlled conditions. Knowledge would be shared selectively, not as charity, but as stabilization. The aim was not to elevate Wakanda above others, but to reduce the asymmetries that had enabled exploitation. Wakanda began to design frameworks for vibranium regulation beyond its borders. These frameworks required diplomacy, transparency, and accountability mechanisms that Wakanda had never practiced openly. The nation had to build institutions for engagement as sophisticated as its institutions for concealment. This was a reversal of centuries of internal design priorities. The rewriting of the oath also altered Wakanda's spiritual interpretation of stewardship. The Panther cult reframed ancestral guidance as a mandate to protect balance, not to preserve isolation. Balance required participation when imbalance threatened collapse. The ancestors were no longer invoked as guardians of silence alone. They were invoked as witnesses to transformation. This shift did not dissolve the sacred nature of vibranium. It recontextualized it. Vibranium remained a trust, but the scope of that trust expanded from Wakanda alone to the world Wakanda now affected by default. The cost of this transformation was internal destabilization. Wakanda's identity had been shaped by absence. Presence required vulnerability. Diplomatic exposure created new attack surfaces. cultural exchange challenged internal narratives of exceptionalism. Wakanda could no longer define itself solely as the hidden continuity of civilization. It had to define itself as an active participant in an unstable global system. This participation carried risk, yet the alternative was to allow vibranium to reshape the world without Wakandan guidance. The oath rewritten in blood marked the end of silence as absolute protection. The ancient oaths had bound Wakanda to the outside world through withdrawal. The rewritten oath bound Wakanda to the outside world through responsibility. The transition was not complete, it had begun. When Wakanda chose presence over absence, it did not enter a neutral world. It entered a world shaped by imbalance, suspicion, and unregulated power. For centuries, Wakanda had studied global systems without participating in them. Now, participation required rapid institutional learning. Diplomacy demanded transparency where secrecy once ruled. Alliance required trust where distance once provided safety. The nation confronted a system it had observed but never practiced. This created a structural asymmetry in Wakanda's external engagement capacity. Its technology surpassed others, yet its diplomatic muscles were underdeveloped. The first Wakandan outreach efforts revealed this weakness. Nations interpreted Wakanda's sudden presence through their own histories of domination. Advanced technology was not seen as stewardship. It was perceived as concealed power now revealed for advantage. Wakanda's intent to stabilize vibranium use was met with suspicion. Foreign governments questioned whether regulation masked control. The ancient oath of silence had preserved Wakanda's safety. It had not preserved trust. This mistrust exposed a deeper system governing global power transfer. Power is accepted when it is gradual and familiar.
Power is resisted when it arrives fully formed and unexplained. Wakanda's emergence violated this rule. The nation appeared fully developed without shared developmental history. Others had no relational context for Wakandan authority. This absence of shared narrative made Wakanda's leadership claims fragile. The world did not know Wakanda's past restraint. It only saw Wakanda's present capacity. Wakanda responded by restructuring how it shared knowledge. Rather than exporting finished solutions, it began exporting processes. This distinction altered power dynamics. Process sharing allowed external institutions to build capacity independently. This reduced dependency while increasing collaboration. Medical systems were introduced through joint research. Energy frameworks were shared through cooperative infrastructure development. Wakanda did not present itself as savior. It positioned itself as partner. This shift required internal change. Wakandan scientists were trained in collaborative design. Diplomats learned to negotiate rather than obscure. The Dora Milaje adapted from border guardians to international liaisons. These changes altered Wakanda's internal identity systems. The nation had defined itself through internal coherence. Now it had to define itself through external relationship. The ancient oaths were invoked during this transition. They were not discarded. They were reinterpreted as constraints on dominance, not engagement. The new oath limited how Wakanda could project power. It restricted military deployment without multilateral consent.
It constrained vibranium distribution to shared governance frameworks. This created a formal system of restrained presence. Wakanda could act, but not unilaterally. The cost of this system was speed. Wakanda's internal systems could respond rapidly. Global systems moved slowly through negotiation and consensus. This mismatch created frustration within Wakandan leadership. Intervention was now delayed by process. The oaths that once enforced silence now enforced patience. Restraint remained the core governing principle. Its expression had changed. As Wakanda entered the world, it confronted a final consequence of its long absence. The world had learned to solve problems without Wakanda. Imperfectly, unevenly, and often violently, yet independently. Wakanda could not replace existing structures. It could only influence them. The seed vault philosophy transformed again. Wakanda was no longer merely preserving knowledge for a future collapse.
It was now investing knowledge into a present that was already unstable. This presence reshaped Wakanda itself. The nation's myths of isolation softened. The belief in exceptional detachment gave way to accountable participation. The ancient oaths had bound Wakanda to silence. The rewritten oath bound Wakanda to responsibility. The world Wakanda entered was not waiting, it was already moving. The ancient oaths were never meant to be static. They had survived because they changed quietly. As Wakanda stepped into visible history, the oaths transformed from sacred boundary into living law. Living law differs from fixed decree in one essential way. It requires continual interpretation. The oath no longer functioned as a wall. It became a lens through which decisions were judged. Each external engagement was weighed not by tradition alone, but by consequence. The elders established a new council mandate. No action could be justified solely by ancestral precedent. Every action had to demonstrate balance between protection and responsibility. This change reshaped Wakanda's internal governance systems. Previously, power flowed inward toward preservation. Now, power flowed outward under constraint. This introduced feedback loops unfamiliar to Wakandan political culture. External reactions began to influence internal policy. Diplomatic failure created domestic debate. Foreign mistrust triggered internal reform. Wakanda's identity systems expanded beyond self-definition. The nation began to define itself through relational impact. The panther cult adapted to this transformation. Rituals marking the ascension of the Black Panther were revised. The oath sworn before the ancestors now included a clause of outward duty. The Black Panther did not only vow to protect Wakanda's borders. The vow extended to protecting balance where Wakandan action altered outcomes. This introduced a new system of accountability. Power was no longer measured only by defense of territory. It was measured by stewardship of consequence. This system altered how Wakanda interpreted ancestral guidance. The ancestors were no longer invoked as arbiters of silence. They were invoked as witnesses to choice. This shift reframed the spiritual logic of Wakandan restraint. Restraint was no longer withdrawal. It became proportional engagement. Wakanda learned to act without dominating. This required continual calibration of scale, timing, and scope. The living law also exposed contradictions within Wakanda's technological culture. Technological solutions were precise, human systems were ambiguous. Wakanda's engineers struggled with the unpredictability of social response. Technologies designed to stabilize regions produced unforeseen political shifts. This forced Wakanda to integrate social analysis into technical design.
The nation learned that power systems extend beyond material capability. They include perception, narrative, and trust. This learning altered Wakandan education systems. Training expanded beyond engineering into cultural literacy and historical sensitivity. The oaths now governed not only what Wakanda revealed, but how it revealed. Disclosure without context produced fear. Context without continuity produced dependency. Wakanda developed phased engagement protocols. Each intervention was designed to become unnecessary over time. This system aimed to prevent the creation of Wakandan reliance. The ancient fear of imperial distortion informed every modern outreach decision. The oaths remained a constraint against becoming what Wakanda had feared in others. Yet living law carries a cost. It demands judgment in situations without precedent. Fixed rules provide comfort. Interpretation requires responsibility. The Black Panther's role became heavier. Leadership was no longer about maintaining inherited silence. It was about navigating irreversible visibility. Every choice now shaped how Wakanda would be remembered. The nation could no longer retreat into myth. The ancient oaths had begun as survival mechanisms. They had evolved into instruments of moral architecture. Wakanda's bond to the outside world was no longer defined by distance. It was defined by measured presence. The oath lived because Wakanda lived differently with the world. Long before Wakanda became a nation hidden behind careful silence, the land existed as an open basin of fertile valleys and exposed mountain passes. Travelers crossed its borders without ceremony. Traders followed rivers that carried gold dust and rare herbs from the highlands into distant markets. The earliest Wakandan clans did not yet call themselves Wakandan. They were families bound to soil, rainfall patterns, and the slow movement of animal herds. Their sense of belonging was shaped by geography, not by borders. What later generations would name secrecy did not yet exist as a concept. The land was known, and knowledge of it passed freely through those who moved across it. The fall that changed this openness began with fire from sky. The vibranium meteorite struck the northern plateau and tore open the earth with a force that altered the course of rivers. This event did not merely introduce a rare metal into Wakandan soil. It reshaped settlement patterns, drawing clans toward the impact zone. Early records preserved in stone glyphs describe how soil near the crater became warmer, more fertile, and strangely resistant to erosion. Crops grown there survived droughts that ruined harvests elsewhere. This practical advantage, not myth, first caused conflict. Neighboring peoples noticed that Wakandan fields endured seasons that broke other communities. Raids followed, not for vibranium, but for grain and livestock protected by these unusual lands. As pressure from outside groups increased, the clans that settled near the vibranium site formed the first shared council. This was not a monarchy, but a system of collective guardianship. Decisions required agreement between river clans, mountain dwellers, and those who lived closest to the crater. The earliest system of power in Wakanda was not based on birthright. Authority came from stewardship of land and harvest. Those who could organize irrigation, protect granaries, and coordinate seasonal labor gained influence. This practical system of governance established a pattern that would later shape Wakanda's political structures. Power did not rest in conquest, it rested in the ability to preserve stability. The first contact with distant kingdoms changed the council's understanding of vulnerability. Records describe emissaries from the north who arrived with iron weapons and organized cavalry units. These visitors did not initially seek war, they sought trade, yet their presence revealed a difference in scale. Wakandan tools were efficient for farming and local defense, but their metallurgy lagged behind these outsiders. The council recognized that the vibranium beneath their soil could transform this imbalance. However, they also observed that outsiders who learned of unusual resources did not remain content with trade. Trade created curiosity. Curiosity led to desire. Desire, in turn, led to conquest. The first system of secrecy developed not as isolation, but as selective truth. Wakanda did not withdraw from the world immediately. Instead, the council created a network of controlled narratives. Travelers were guided along specific paths. Villages near borders presented themselves as the full extent of Wakandan civilization. Inland settlements were gradually relocated deeper into the basin.
This was the origin of Wakanda's layered geography of truth. Outsiders believed they had seen the heart of the land. In reality, they had been shown a surface shaped for observation. This was not deception for its own sake. It was a strategic response to a repeated pattern. Knowledge of abundance invited violence. As vibranium was refined, the balance of power within Wakanda changed. Those who learned to shape the metal gained influence over defense and infrastructure. Tools became lighter, stronger, and more precise. Irrigation channels reinforced with vibranium resisted collapse during floods. Storage vaults protected grain from rot and pests. This technological shift created a new system of authority. The council began to rely on vibranium artisans for security planning. Over time, this reliance produced a specialized class responsible for controlling knowledge of the metal's properties. Knowledge itself became regulated. Not every clan elder was permitted to learn how vibranium was extracted or shaped. This was the first instance of internal secrecy, not imposed on outsiders, but on Wakandans themselves. The emergence of the heart-shaped herb altered Wakanda's social structure in a different way. The herb's connection to vibranium-rich soil produced physiological effects that strengthened the body and sharpened perception. Early use of the herb was not ritualized. It was medicinal, administered to heal warriors injured by raids. Over generations, the herb's effects became associated with leadership because those who bore its strength survived longer in conflict. This created a feedback loop between survival and authority. Leaders lived longer. Longer lives allowed them to preserve institutional memory. This concentration of memory in leadership roles shaped Wakanda's cultural continuity. Knowledge of past threats did not vanish with one generation. It remained embodied in those who governed. The first formal oath binding Wakanda to the outside world emerged from a crisis rather than diplomacy. A coalition of neighboring tribes attempted a coordinated assault on the vibranium fields after rumors of strange metal spread along trade routes. Wakanda's defenders repelled the attack, but the council recognized a pattern forming.
If Wakanda remained open, conflict would recur with increasing scale. If Wakanda closed entirely, isolation would make it blind to shifting regional powers.
The oath that followed established a dual obligation. Wakanda would not reveal its true resources or capabilities, yet it would also observe and understand the world beyond its borders. This oath bound Wakanda to vigilance rather than withdrawal. Scouts were trained to travel beyond Wakanda's lands, gathering information on emerging empires and technologies. The world would not know Wakanda's strength, but Wakanda would know the world's intentions. This system of outward observation and inward concealment became a governing principle. It created a quiet form of engagement. Wakanda learned languages, trade patterns, and military doctrines of distant nations without revealing its own advancements. Over time, this produced a cultural stance that valued patience over reaction. Wakanda did not intervene when nearby kingdoms rose and fell. It studied them. The oath transformed Wakandan identity. They were no longer merely guardians of land. They became guardians of restraint. The decision not to dominate others, despite growing capability, became a moral structure taught across generations. Power, once tied to harvest protection, now carried a responsibility to remain unseen. By the end of this early period, Wakanda was no longer an open basin of shared pathways. It had become a layered society built upon selective visibility. The world beyond its borders continued to move, unaware that it was being quietly observed. Within Wakanda, knowledge had become both a resource and a burden. The first veil had been placed between Wakanda and the outside world, not through walls alone, but through an evolving system of controlled truth, guarded knowledge, and deliberate restraint. The oath that bound Wakanda to watch the outside world without revealing itself did not remain an abstract principle. It reshaped the physical borders of the nation. The council ordered the transformation of natural boundaries into instruments of concealment. Mountain passes were narrowed through controlled collapses. River crossings were rerouted so that travelers followed predictable routes that could be observed from concealed ridgelines. This was not merely fortification. It was the creation of a living border system designed to regulate perception. Outsiders did not encounter walls. They encountered landscapes that quietly guided them away from Wakanda's inner regions. Over time, these alterations changed trade patterns in the region. Merchants began to speak of Wakanda as a land difficult to cross, not because of hostility, but because of terrain that seemed unfriendly to passage.
The land itself became the first guardian of secrecy. To sustain this border system, Wakanda established the Order of Border Witnesses. These were not soldiers in the conventional sense. They were observers, trained in languages, regional politics, and the subtle movements of caravans and emissaries. Their role was to witness patterns rather than to provoke confrontation. When a neighboring kingdom expanded its patrols near Wakandan territory, the witnesses recorded troop numbers and supply routes. When trade routes shifted, they noted which ports gained influence and which fell into decline. This observational system created a map of the world that was constantly updated within Wakanda's archives. Knowledge of external power dynamics became institutional rather than personal. The nation no longer depended solely on the memory of elders. It developed a living record of the world beyond its borders.
This quiet intelligence network changed Wakanda's relationship with time. While other societies reacted to threats as they appeared, Wakanda prepared for shifts years before they manifested at its borders. The council learned to anticipate scarcity in neighboring lands by tracking rainfall patterns and harvest reports gathered by the witnesses. When famine weakened nearby communities, Wakanda reinforced its borders without aggression. It did not intervene, but it did not become vulnerable. This created a moral tension that would echo through Wakandan philosophy. To know suffering and choose restraint required justification. The elders argued that premature intervention would expose Wakanda's resources and invite conquest. Thus, restraint became codified as a protective ethic rather than indifference. The decision not to act was framed as a necessary sacrifice for long-term survival. As vibranium technology advanced, the illusion of Wakanda as an ordinary land required constant maintenance. The artisans developed surface-level technologies for border settlements that mirrored the tools of neighboring regions. Plows, housing materials, and simple weapons were intentionally designed to appear modest. This was not technological stagnation, it was controlled presentation. The system governing technological display ensured that any outsider who glimpsed Wakandan life would perceive nothing worth coveting.
The deeper technologies remained inland, guarded by both physical distance and social regulation. This separation between visible and hidden infrastructure became a second veil layered over the first. The world saw a poor borderland. Wakanda lived as a sophisticated core concealed within it. The Covenant also reshaped Wakandan education. Children in border clans were trained differently from those raised near the vibranium heartland. Border youth learned foreign dialects, trade customs, and the art of appearing unremarkable. Inland youth studied engineering principles, metallurgy, and governance. This educational divergence created two complementary roles within Wakandan society. One faced outward, absorbing the world's patterns. The other faced inward, sustaining Wakanda's systems. Movement between these roles required ritual approval. This prevented accidental leakage of sensitive knowledge into border regions where outsiders might overhear or observe. Knowledge transfer was regulated not only by secrecy, but by social structure. The education system itself became a mechanism of containment. A turning point came when a neighboring kingdom collapsed into civil war. Refugees approached Wakandan borders seeking shelter. The border witnesses reported the approach weeks before it occurred, allowing the council to prepare. The decision they faced revealed the cost of the oath. If Wakanda admitted the refugees, it would reveal stability and abundance. If it turned them away, it would violate emerging ethical teachings that valued life preservation. The council resolved the crisis by creating temporary sanctuaries disguised as remote farming outposts. Refugees were offered food and rest, but not access to inland territories. When stability returned to their homeland, the refugees were guided back with supplies. This action established a third system within Wakanda's external policy: limited humanitarian engagement under controlled conditions. Wakanda would offer aid that left no trace of its true capacity. Compassion was allowed, but exposure was not. The Covenant also required Wakanda to regulate internal narratives about the outside world. Myths and stories began to portray distant kingdoms as unpredictable and often violent. This was not fabrication, it was selective emphasis. The purpose was to cultivate a cultural instinct for caution. Generations grew up understanding that openness had once led to repeated raids and loss. This memory shaped identity. Wakandans did not see themselves as superior, they saw themselves as custodians of a fragile equilibrium.
Their secrecy was framed not as fear of others, but as responsibility toward future generations. The world was not depicted as evil, but as unstable, and instability was dangerous to expose oneself to. Over time, the covenant of borders and witnesses transformed Wakanda into a nation defined by observation rather than participation. It remained connected to the outside world through constant study, yet separate through disciplined concealment. This dual posture created internal stability, but also seeded questions among younger generations. As knowledge of external suffering and conflict accumulated in Wakanda's archives, so did unease. The Covenant had preserved Wakanda's safety. It had also limited its role in shaping the fate of others. The first quiet doubts began to form, not yet voiced in public councils, but whispered among those who studied the world too closely to remain untouched by it. The doubts that began as whispers among the observers did not remain private for long. As the border witnesses' records grew thicker, the council confronted a problem that no fortification could solve. Knowledge accumulated faster than it could be preserved in human memory. Elders who had witnessed the first raids carried context that younger record keepers lacked. Written glyphs preserved facts, but they did not preserve judgment. The meaning behind restraint, the reasoning behind concealment, risked becoming hollow if reduced to marks on stone. In response, Wakanda established the Archive of Living Memory. This was not a building alone, but a system. Selected historians were trained to inherit not only records, but interpretive frameworks. Each was apprenticed to an elder who had lived through external crises. This system ensured that decisions were transmitted with their ethical weight intact. Knowledge was not merely stored, it was embodied, taught through dialogue across generations. This archive reshaped governance. The council could no longer justify decisions through precedent alone. The living archivists were granted voice in deliberations when matters touched the covenant with the outside world. Their role was not to command outcomes, but to reveal long-term consequences that written records could not capture. This created a system of temporal accountability. Policies were evaluated not only for immediate safety, but for how they would shape Wakandan identity across centuries. In this way, the covenant matured from a defensive posture into a constitutional principle. The nation began to measure its actions against the continuity of its own moral memory. As vibranium refinement advanced, concealment required more than careful borders and curated narratives. The artisans discovered that vibranium's interaction with sound and energy could be tuned to distort perception. Early experiments did not create invisibility. They produced localized interference fields that bent light and dampened vibrations. These fields were first used to mask the movement of supply caravans between inland centers and border settlements.
Outsiders observed empty roads where Wakandan convoys passed. This technological veil introduced a new system of power transfer within Wakanda. Control over concealment technologies became centralized under a newly formed circle of stewards. Their mandate was strict. Concealment could protect Wakanda, but it could also enable abuse. The stewards were bound by oath to the council and the living archivists, ensuring that the tools of invisibility could not be used to suppress internal dissent. This system linked technology to governance, embedding restraint into innovation itself. The emergence of concealment technologies altered Wakanda's relationship with succession. Leadership transitions had once depended primarily on consensus and survival-based authority. As the nation's hidden systems grew complex, continuity of knowledge became essential to stability. The succession rites were reformed to include a period of shared governance between outgoing and incoming leaders. During this interval, the living archivists supervised the transfer of strategic knowledge, including border operations, concealment protocols, and humanitarian engagement procedures. This system reduced the risk of abrupt policy shifts driven by individual temperament. Power was no longer transferred in a single moment. It moved through structured overlap, preserving institutional memory during change. This reconfiguration of succession embedded the covenant within leadership itself, making secrecy and observation inherited responsibilities rather than personal choices. The law of unbroken lines emerged during this period as a response to a near failure of concealment. A foreign expedition, guided by rumors of fertile lands, penetrated deeper into Wakandan territory than any before.
The border witnesses detected the movement, but seasonal storms disrupted communication. By the time the council convened, the expedition had glimpsed inland infrastructure inconsistent with the border settlement's modest appearance. The concealment stewards activated interference fields to misdirect the expedition's path, but the incident revealed a vulnerability. The law of unbroken lines mandated that no single layer of concealment could operate in isolation. Borders, narratives, technology, and education had to reinforce one another continuously. If any line of concealment weakened, the others were obligated to compensate. This created an integrated security doctrine. Secrecy was no longer the product of discrete measures. It became an interdependent system, resilient through redundancy. The humanitarian sanctuaries established during earlier crises were also formalized under this law. Wakanda created protocols for transient aid that included memory erasure techniques based on vibranium-induced neural calm. These techniques did not remove knowledge through force. They eased traumatic memories of refuge without altering identity. Refugees remembered being helped, but not the routes taken or the infrastructure encountered. This practice introduced a moral tension that the living archivists documented carefully. The system protected Wakanda's secrecy while preserving the dignity of those aided. Yet it also shaped Wakanda's ethical self-image. Compassion was expressed within constraints that prioritized national survival. The choice to limit what others could remember became part of Wakanda's moral burden. This burden was taught openly within Wakanda, preventing the practice from becoming invisible, even as its effects were concealed from outsiders. As Wakanda's archives deepened, patterns in the outside world became clearer.
Empires rose through resource concentration and fell through overextension. The witnesses' reports showed that civilizations which revealed their strategic assets too early invited coalitions against them. This observation reframed the original oath. The covenant was no longer understood as uniquely Wakandan. It was seen as a general principle of power dynamics. Visibility attracted convergence of force. Concealment preserved autonomy. Wakanda began to study not only the actions of other nations, but the structural reasons behind their collapse.
This analytical posture reinforced the Council's commitment to restraint. Intervention in foreign conflicts, even with superior capability, risked altering the balance in ways that would draw attention. The Covenant matured into a doctrine of minimal disturbance. Wakanda would observe the world's cycles without accelerating them. Within Wakanda, this doctrine generated a subtle shift in cultural identity. The people came to see themselves as caretakers of continuity rather than participants in global transformation. Festivals and rites began to honor the unseen labor of the witnesses and archivists. Songs commemorated not victories over enemies, but years in which no borders were crossed by force. This cultural emphasis shaped collective aspiration. To be Wakandan was to preserve a hidden equilibrium. The Covenant had moved from policy into identity. Yet this identity carried cost. Younger scholars, raised within the archive of living memory, began to question whether restraint preserved justice or merely stability. They observed that the law of unbroken lines protected Wakanda's autonomy, but it also insulated the nation from responsibility for suffering beyond its borders. These questions did not fracture the Covenant, they enriched it with internal debate. The system of secrecy, observation, and restrained aid had preserved Wakanda for generations. Now it faced a quieter test, whether a nation bound to watch could remain morally whole while choosing not to act. The first true breach of Wakanda's concealment did not occur through invasion or discovery of vibranium. It came through trade. A Wakandan border envoy, trained to appear unremarkable, entered a distant coastal city to observe the growth of maritime power. This city had become a hub for shipbuilding, drawing resources and knowledge from many regions. The envoy's reports marked the first recognition of economic imperialism within Wakandan archives. This was a new threat model. Wakanda's concealment protected against armies. It did not directly address systems that bound regions through trade obligations.
As maritime trade networks expanded, Wakanda's border settlements felt indirect pressure. Neighboring communities began to align their economies with coastal markets, shifting agriculture toward export crops. This altered local food security and increased vulnerability to external price fluctuations. The border witnesses observed that scarcity now traveled along contracts rather than raids. Wakanda's council recognized that concealment alone could not shield it from economic systems reshaping the region. This realization introduced a new layer to the Covenant. Wakanda began to regulate its own trade patterns more carefully, limiting exports that could entangle it in dependency chains. The system of outward observation expanded to include economic flows, not merely troop movements. Power was now understood as something that traveled through agreements as much as through weapons. The breach occurred when a foreign merchant consortium traced irregularities in regional trade routes back to Wakandan border settlements.
The appearance of consistent stability in an otherwise volatile region drew scrutiny. Investigators followed supply patterns and noticed that Wakandan villages maintained food security despite widespread market disruptions. This pattern suggested hidden infrastructure. The concealment stewards activated interference fields along caravan paths, but economic inquiry was harder to misdirect than physical movement. Contracts created paper trails. Wakanda's invisibility technologies could hide roads, but not discrepancies in regional economic data. The Council confronted a new vulnerability. Information economies could reveal Wakanda's existence indirectly, even if no one crossed its borders. In response, Wakanda established the Quiet Exchange Protocol. This system introduced controlled participation in regional markets through intermediaries. Wakanda provided surplus resources to allied border communities in ways that blended into existing trade flows. This reduced anomalies that could attract investigation. The protocol represented a shift from pure concealment to managed integration. Wakanda would now shape the patterns it observed, subtly adjusting regional stability without revealing itself. This was the first step toward influence beyond observation. The covenant evolved again. Wakanda was no longer merely watching the world. It was quietly correcting imbalances that threatened to expose it. The ethical implications of this influence became clear during a prolonged drought in neighboring lands. Market-driven crop specialization had left many communities dependent on imported grain. When drought reduced harvests, famine loomed. Wakanda possessed agricultural technologies capable of stabilizing yields even in harsh conditions. The Council debated whether to intervene openly. The living archivists presented historical parallels. Past civilizations that revealed advanced technologies during crises became targets once stability returned. The decision was made to intervene indirectly. Wakandan agronomists trained select intermediaries from neighboring communities, presenting methods as rediscovered local practices rather than foreign innovations. This preserved Wakanda's secrecy while altering regional resilience. The system taught a new lesson. Influence could be exercised through knowledge diffusion, disguised as cultural continuity. Wakanda began to view intervention not as a binary choice, but as a spectrum of visibility. This period also saw the refinement of concealment technologies to address informational exposure. Vibranium-based fields were adapted to distort not only physical perception, but also electromagnetic signals. This prevented early forms of long-distance communication from penetrating Wakandan airspace. The development was not motivated by paranoia. It responded to a concrete pattern. As trade networks grew, so did communication networks. Knowledge traveled faster than people. Wakanda's systems of secrecy had to evolve to match the velocity of information. This created a new system of governance over technological boundaries. Any innovation that affected external detectability required approval from both the concealment stewards and the living archivists. The system linked innovation to ethical oversight. Progress was permitted, but only when its external consequences were understood. The first internal crisis over intervention arose when a neighboring polity descended into systematic exploitation under foreign-backed rulers. Reports detailed forced labor and resource extraction that destabilized entire regions.
Younger Wakandan scholars argued that Wakanda's indirect methods were insufficient.
The quiet exchange protocol could not dismantle structures of oppression. The council confronted a fracture within its own covenant. The original oath bound Wakanda to observation and restraint. The evolving doctrine recognized that inaction could perpetuate harm. To resolve this tension, Wakanda developed the doctrine of selective exposure. Under this doctrine, Wakanda could reveal limited capabilities in controlled contexts to disrupt systems of exploitation, provided the exposure did not reveal the nation's core. This marked a fundamental shift. Wakanda accepted that secrecy was not an absolute good. It was a tool to be balanced against ethical responsibility. The first application of selective exposure involved the quiet sabotage of foreign extraction equipment operating near Wakandan borders. The intervention was framed publicly as local resistance aided by environmental factors. The outcome weakened exploitative operations without revealing Wakanda's hand. This act demonstrated a new system of power transfer. Wakanda could now shape external outcomes through calibrated disruption. The covenant expanded from watching to guiding. The nation remained unseen, but its influence left discernible effects. This redefinition of engagement transformed Wakanda's identity once more. It was no longer solely a custodian of hidden equilibrium. It became a quiet steward of regional balance. This shift deepened internal debate. The living archivists recorded that each intervention altered Wakanda's moral trajectory. The nation could no longer claim neutrality. Even indirect influence created responsibility for consequences. The system of secrecy had protected Wakanda for generations. Now it carried the weight of choice. Wakanda's greatest power was not vibranium or concealment. It was the capacity to decide when restraint preserved justice and when restraint protected only comfort. The doctrine of selective exposure did not end debate within Wakanda. It reorganized it. Once the council accepted that secrecy could be temporarily bent to prevent harm, the question shifted from whether to intervene to how intervention could be governed without eroding the covenant entirely. The elders recognized that unregulated influence risked creating a shadow empire, one that shaped events without accountability. To prevent this, Wakanda formalized the Oath of the Hidden Hand. This oath bound any Wakandan agent acting beyond the borders to three constraints. First, actions must preserve the invisibility of Wakanda's core. Second, interventions must aim to restore local autonomy rather than replace one dependency with another. Third, every action required review by the living archivists after completion. This system transformed intervention into a process accountable to Wakandan history and ethics rather than to the ambitions of individuals. The hidden hand agents were trained in methods of indirect change. They studied local power structures, cultural norms, and economic dependencies before acting. This education emphasized cause and effect over immediate results. For example, dismantling a single exploitative leader without altering the structures that supported them would create instability rather than relief. The agents learned to disrupt supply chains, expose contradictions within oppressive systems, and strengthen local capacities for resistance. Wakanda's influence became systemic rather than tactical. This approach reflected a deeper understanding of how civilizations decay or recover. Systems, not individuals, determined long-term outcomes. By acting on systems, Wakanda minimized the risk that its interventions would be traced back to a singular foreign hand. The architecture of influence extended into Wakanda's internal governance. The council established a review chamber where the consequences of interventions were examined years after their execution. The living archivists presented evidence of long-term effects, including unintended outcomes. In one early case, disruption of foreign extraction equipment reduced exploitation, but also created power vacuums that local factions filled through violence. This outcome forced Wakanda to refine its doctrine. Intervention could not end with disruption. It required scaffolding for recovery. The Quiet Exchange Protocol was expanded to include post-intervention support through intermediaries, such as training in cooperative trade structures and conflict mediation. This evolution reflected a new system of power responsibility. Wakanda accepted that influence created obligations that extended beyond the moment of action. The Oath of the Hidden Hand also reshaped Wakanda's technological development. Concealment tools were refined to leave no recoverable traces. Vibranium-based interference fields were tuned to degrade foreign equipment without introducing materials that could be studied. This prevented technological reverse engineering. Wakanda recognized that revealing methods of sabotage would teach others how to replicate them.
Knowledge, once again, became the most guarded resource. This reinforced the law of unbroken lines by integrating influence operations into the existing concealment architecture. Secrecy, observation, and intervention were now interdependent systems rather than separate doctrines. Within Wakanda, the expansion of influence altered cultural narratives. Stories began to circulate about unseen guardians who corrected injustice without claiming credit. These stories were carefully framed. They did not celebrate Wakandan power. They emphasized the fragility of balance and the dangers of arrogance. The purpose of these narratives was to prevent a culture of saviorism from taking root. Wakandans were taught that intervention was a burden, not a glory. This cultural framing functioned as a psychological system of restraint. It reduced the temptation to expand influence beyond necessity. Identity remained tied to preservation rather than domination. The world beyond Wakanda felt the effects of these quiet interventions without understanding their source. Regions once destabilized by extraction began to develop local trade cooperatives. Some oppressive contracts collapsed under legal challenges sparked by information leaks. These shifts altered regional power balances subtly. Wakanda's observation network recorded a pattern. When local autonomy increased, external scrutiny of Wakandan borders decreased. Stability in neighboring regions reduced the pressure that had historically driven exploration and exploitation. The covenant had come full circle. By shaping external stability, Wakanda indirectly strengthened its own concealment. Influence and secrecy reinforced one another. Yet this architecture of influence carried risk. the more Wakanda shaped outcomes, the more it became entangled in the consequences of distant decisions. The living archivists warned that over time, Wakanda could become a hidden fulcrum upon which regional histories turned. This would contradict the Covenant's intent to avoid centrality. The Council responded by formalizing thresholds for intervention. Only systemic harms that threatened regional collapse or mass exploitation justified action. Lesser injustices were documented but not altered. This created a painful boundary. Wakanda acknowledged that it could not correct every wrong without becoming what it sought to avoid, a silent empire directing the fate of others. As the oath of the hidden hand matured, Wakanda's relationship with the outside world became one of measured entanglement.
The nation was no longer merely concealed. It was embedded within regional systems as an unseen stabilizer. This deepened Wakanda's internal understanding of power. Power was not only the capacity to act, it was the discipline to choose when not to. The covenant that began as a shield against discovery had evolved into a complex moral architecture. Wakanda's oaths bounded not just to secrecy, but to a difficult stewardship of influence that demanded constant vigilance over its own intentions. As Wakanda's unseen influence matured, a quiet fracture formed within the covenant itself. The border witnesses and hidden hand agents began to report a shift in the outside world's methods of inquiry. Exploration no longer relied solely on caravans or merchant networks. Scholars from distant centers of learning were developing comparative studies of geography, climate, and regional stability. They noticed that certain regions remained inexplicably insulated from cycles of famine and collapse. Wakanda's careful adjustments to neighboring stability, once invisible, began to form statistical patterns. These patterns did not reveal Wakanda directly, but they created anomalies in the historical record. The world was beginning to sense an absence of explanation. The fracture was not in Wakanda's concealment technologies, but in the logic of the world's understanding. When outcomes no longer matched known causes, curiosity intensified. The Council recognized a new system of threat emerging: epistemic pressure. This pressure arose when knowledge systems sought to explain stability without visible sources. Wakanda could conceal roads and distort signals, but it could not easily disguise patterns of resilience it had helped create. To address this, Wakanda revised the Quiet Exchange Protocol to include the deliberate allowance of small, visible failures in border regions. Crops occasionally failed. Trade routes suffered limited disruptions. These controlled imperfections restored the appearance of normal volatility. This painful choice reflected a new understanding of concealment. Absolute stability drew attention. Imperfection preserved invisibility. The system of secrecy had evolved to include managed vulnerability. Wakanda accepted localized hardship within safe bounds to protect the greater covenant. This introduced a profound moral cost. Preservation of secrecy now required allowing limited suffering to occur uncorrected. This compromise strained Wakanda's internal ethics. The living archivists documented dissent among younger scholars who had grown accustomed to the nation's quiet interventions.
They argued that deliberate restraint from alleviating known hardship violated the moral architecture Wakanda had built. The elders countered that unrestricted intervention would collapse the concealment system and invite external domination, ultimately causing greater harm. This debate did not fracture the council, but it changed the tone of governance. Decisions were no longer framed solely as protective. They were acknowledged as tragic necessities. Wakanda began to teach that moral clarity was rare in a world governed by concealment. The covenant demanded acceptance of imperfect outcomes. This teaching reshaped Wakandan identity from guardians of balance to stewards of difficult compromises. The fracture widened when a hidden hand operation was partially exposed. A foreign intelligence service intercepted fragments of interference field data following the failure of extraction equipment. The fragments did not reveal vibranium or Wakandan origins. However, they demonstrated that a technologically advanced, unseen actor was operating within the region. This revelation altered external behavior. States began to invest in detection technologies and covert inquiry. Wakanda's concealment systems now faced an adaptive opponent. The law of unbroken lines was tested. Each layer of secrecy compensated for the breach, but the incident forced Wakanda to confront a fundamental reality. Secrecy was not static. It was an ongoing contest with evolving methods of discovery. In response, Wakanda restructured the stewardship of concealment technologies. The stewards were no longer permitted to innovate solely for efficiency. Each innovation required simulation of potential external detection responses. Wakanda began to model how other civilizations might adapt if they sensed hidden intervention. This introduced a new system of anticipatory governance. Decisions were evaluated not only for current effectiveness, but for how they would shape future inquiry patterns. This approach mirrored Wakanda's earlier observation doctrine, but applied it inward toward its own actions. Wakanda became a student of how it might one day be discovered. This reflexive awareness deepened the nation's strategic maturity, but it also intensified internal anxiety. To anticipate one's own exposure is to live with the constant awareness of eventual visibility.
The fracture of silence also influenced succession. A younger leader, raised within the archive of living memory, challenged the assumption that Wakanda's invisibility could be maintained indefinitely. The living archivists presented historical parallels in which long-hidden powers eventually emerged under external pressure. The Council began to consider contingency frameworks for gradual revelation. This did not mean abandoning secrecy. It meant planning for a future in which concealment might fail. Wakanda established protocols for phased disclosure that would reveal limited aspects of its capabilities in controlled contexts should discovery become inevitable. This system of potential revelation marked a profound shift. The Covenant, once absolute in its commitment to invisibility, now acknowledged the finitude of secrecy. The burden of visibility extended into cultural consciousness. Artists and storytellers began to explore themes of emergence and recognition. These works did not predict exposure. They examined what it meant to be seen after generations of concealment. The purpose of such narratives was preparatory rather than prophetic. Wakanda recognized that a society unprepared for recognition might respond with fear or aggression if exposed. Cultural rehearsal became a system of psychological resilience. The people were invited to imagine a future where Wakanda's hidden equilibrium could no longer be maintained. This imagination did not weaken the covenant, it strengthened it by grounding secrecy in realism rather than illusion. By this stage, Wakanda's oaths bound it not only to the outside world, but to the possibility of change. The covenant had begun as a shield against conquest. It had evolved into a complex moral and strategic framework that governed observation, intervention, restraint, and now preparation for visibility. Wakanda stood at a quiet threshold. The world beyond its borders was becoming more curious, more systematic in its search for hidden causes. The nation's greatest challenge was no longer whether it could remain unseen, but how it would remain itself if the veil were ever lifted. Long before Wakanda sealed its borders and learned to speak to the world through shadows, the land was shaped by an event that no neighboring people fully understood.
A celestial object fell from the sky, striking the plains beside a cluster of ancient rivers. The impact reshaped the soil, infused the ground with unfamiliar energies, and scattered fragments of an unknown metal across the region. The earliest clans of Wakanda did not yet call this metal vibranium, but they learned quickly that it altered everything it touched. Tools crafted from it cut more cleanly, drums made from it carried sound farther, and wounds treated near it healed with unusual speed. These early changes did not create power overnight, they created questions. The people who settled near the fallen star began to organize themselves around the mystery it introduced into their world. In the generations that followed, the clans learned that vibranium did not merely strengthen objects, it reshaped systems of life. Soil enriched by its presence yielded crops that resisted drought. Weapons forged with even trace amounts of the metal absorbed shock rather than transmitting it. More quietly, the elders observed that children born near the crater often displayed heightened resilience to illness. These observations did not become public belief at once. They were guarded knowledge, passed through ritual instruction rather than open teaching. The earliest Wakandan governance system emerged from this practice of selective preservation. Knowledge was treated as a resource equal to metal or land. The first council of elders formed not to rule territory, but to regulate information. They created rules determining who could learn what about the fallen star and when. The first oath that bound Wakanda to the outside world was not an oath of trade or alliance, it was an oath of restraint. As travelers from nearby regions began to pass through the plains, drawn by rumors of fertile land and strange lights at night, the elders recognized a growing danger. Outsiders could carry stories beyond the valleys. Stories would invite curiosity. Curiosity would invite claim. The council chose a difficult path. They would allow limited passage, but only through designated routes and only under observation. In exchange, Wakanda would offer protection to travelers who honored their customs. This oath was carved into stone markers placed along the old river roads. The markers did not name vibranium, they named peace. The system created by this oath was simple, yet enduring. Wakanda would remain present in the world, but never transparent within it. Over time, the 5 tribes that would later define Wakandan identity settled their territories around the vibranium mound. Each tribe developed a specialized relationship to the resource. The mining tribe learned how to extract fragments without destabilizing the ground. The border tribe developed early surveillance methods using terrain, smoke patterns, and sound signals to monitor travelers. The river tribe refined agriculture around vibranium-enriched soil, increasing food security. The merchant tribe established cautious exchange with neighboring peoples, trading goods that revealed nothing of Wakanda's deeper wealth. The Jabari, who would later separate from the central authority, chose isolation in the mountains, rejecting dependence on the fallen star. This division of roles formed Wakanda's first internal power transfer system. Authority was not inherited solely by blood, but negotiated through stewardship of specialized knowledge. As Wakanda's influence stabilized internally, pressure from beyond the valleys increased. Neighboring kingdoms began to expand their territories, often through conquest. Refugees from these conflicts reached Wakanda's borders, seeking land and safety. The elders faced a choice that would define Wakanda's moral posture for centuries. To accept refugees openly would expose their resources. To refuse all would condemn innocent people to violence. The second ancient oath emerged from this tension. Wakanda would provide sanctuary, but only through assimilation. Those who crossed into Wakanda would be welcomed, but they would surrender former allegiances and accept new laws. This oath created a quiet mechanism of cultural absorption. Wakanda did not conquer, it integrated. Over generations, this practice strengthened internal unity while reducing the number of voices who could speak of Wakanda as something separate. The sanctuary oath carried a cost. Each person accepted into Wakanda increased the risk of disclosure. To manage this, the council expanded the system of knowledge restriction. Maps showing the true geography of Wakanda were never shared with newcomers. Trade routes were altered regularly. Oral histories replaced written records for sensitive events. The preservation of truth became layered. One story existed for the people, another existed for the elders.
This system of controlled narrative shaped Wakandan culture itself. Memory was treated as a living structure, not a static archive. What the people believed could change if the protection of the nation required it. By the time Wakanda crowned its first recognized Black Panther, the oaths had already bound the nation to the world through carefully measured contact. The Panther's role was not only martial, it was diplomatic restraint embodied. The heart-shaped herb, grown near vibranium-rich soil, granted heightened perception. Those who consumed it reported an increased sensitivity to threats beyond sight. This was not mystical awareness alone. It was a trained responsiveness to patterns of disruption in trade, movement, and rumor. The panther became the living system through which Wakanda sensed the outside world without revealing itself. Through this role, Wakanda learned to shape its future by controlling what it allowed others to see. The first era of Wakandan secrecy did not begin with isolation. It began with promises. Promises to protect travelers. Promises to shelter the displaced. Promises to keep knowledge from becoming a weapon against itself. These ancient oaths did not close Wakanda to the world. They taught Wakanda how to remain connected without becoming vulnerable. The structure they created would endure, shaping every future decision about when to step into the light and when to remain unseen. The oaths that shaped Wakanda's early posture toward the outside world did not remain static. As neighboring regions shifted through cycles of war and consolidation, Wakanda's leaders realized that promises alone could not preserve secrecy. The world beyond the valleys began to organize itself through emerging empires, each governed by records, tribute systems, and written claims of territory. These new powers did not rely on rumor, they relied on ledgers. Wakanda's first response to this development was subtle. The council ordered the creation of a hidden record system that tracked foreign polities without allowing foreign records to track Wakanda. This internal archive, maintained by the merchant tribe in cooperation with the border tribe, cataloged the rise and fall of neighboring kingdoms, their rulers, trade patterns, and patterns of expansion. Wakanda did not record these facts for curiosity. The records were used to anticipate which borders would shift next and which roads would soon carry soldiers instead of merchants. This hidden ledger created a new system of external awareness. Wakanda began to treat information about other nations as a defensive resource. Scouts were trained not only to observe terrain, but to recognize political signs. A change in the banners carried by caravans signaled a change in authority.
A shift in the coinage used in trade indicated economic consolidation. Wakandan observers learned to read the world's movements through small details. This practice reduced Wakanda's need for overt contact. The nation could withdraw from regions that were becoming unstable before conflict reached its borders. This was not isolation through ignorance, it was isolation through foresight. As foreign powers grew more ambitious, Wakanda faced a new challenge. Several kingdoms began to commission explorers to map distant lands. The routes that had once carried pilgrims and refugees now carried surveyors. The elders recognized that physical borders alone could not prevent discovery. They responded by formalizing a system of geographic misdirection. Wakandan guides, posing as ordinary traders, led explorers along routes that appeared to encircle the region without ever approaching its heart. Landmarks were renamed in foreign accounts. Rivers were described as impassable where secret crossings existed. Over time, maps produced by outsiders began to depict Wakanda as a barren corridor between more valuable territories. This strategy created a protective fiction. Wakanda became known not as a place of interest, but as a place of inconvenience. The system of misdirection required coordination across generations. Each guide was trained not only in routes, but in narrative consistency. A false geography, once introduced into foreign records, had to be maintained. This created a quiet burden. Wakandan travelers had to remember two worlds at once, the true landscape of their homeland and the false one the world believed in. Errors could unravel decades of careful distortion. To prevent this, the council instituted an oath of the path-bearers, a lineage within the border tribe tasked with preserving the false maps. Their role was hereditary, but not automatic. Each successor underwent years of training to internalize the fictional geography as fluently as the real one. This system ensured continuity of deception without relying on written records that could be captured. The emergence of long-distance trade networks introduced another pressure. Rare materials from distant continents began to circulate through regional markets. Some of these materials interacted unpredictably with vibranium. Wakandan artisans noticed that certain alloys destabilized vibranium-based tools, causing resonance patterns that weakened their structure. This discovery forced a change in Wakanda's trade policy.
The merchant tribe revised exchange practices to prevent foreign materials from entering Wakanda in significant quantities. Instead of importing raw goods, Wakanda shifted toward exporting finished items crafted to reveal no internal technologies. This decision altered the nation's economic relationship with the outside world. Wakanda ceased to be a recipient of influence. It became a controlled source of limited novelty. The system preserved technological advantage by restricting points of contamination. The Black Panther's role evolved alongside these changes. No longer tasked only with sensing threats, the Panther became the final arbiter of external engagement. When the ledger indicated rising instability in a neighboring realm, the Panther authorized reductions in border contact. When a kingdom collapsed into famine or civil war, the Panther weighed whether sanctuary could be offered without compromising secrecy. These decisions were never purely strategic. They shaped Wakanda's internal identity. Each act of restraint reinforced the belief that survival depended on distance. Each act of aid reinforced the belief that strength carried responsibility. The Panther stood between these principles, ensuring that neither erased the other. During this period, Wakanda encountered its first sustained attempt at infiltration. A coalition of foreign merchants, suspecting that Wakanda's modest exports concealed greater wealth, arranged for several families to settle near the border under the guise of permanent trade relations. The sanctuary oath required Wakanda to accept those who sought to join its people. Yet the council recognized the risk of coordinated deception. The response was not expulsion, it was dispersal. The families were integrated into different tribes, separated from one another, and placed under mentorship. Over years, their original purpose dissolved into genuine belonging. This episode revealed a deeper mechanism within Wakandan society. Assimilation was not merely cultural, it was strategic. By absorbing potential threats into social bonds, Wakanda transformed external pressure into internal cohesion. The hidden ledger, the false maps, and the controlled trade system did more than preserve secrecy. They reshaped Wakanda's understanding of power. Power was no longer measured by what could be displayed. It was measured by what could be withheld without consequence. These systems bound Wakanda to the outside world through constant observation and selective response. The oaths that once governed passage and sanctuary now extended into records, routes, and relationships. Wakanda remained present in the unfolding history of nations, yet absent from their understanding of where true power resided. As the centuries progressed, Wakanda discovered that secrecy did not prevent conflict. It changed its form. While neighboring realms fought visible wars of armies and banners, Wakanda entered quieter wars, fought through records, rumors, and selective erasure. The hidden ledger, once a tool for observation, became a battlefield of influence. Wakandan archivists learned that foreign histories were fragile. Chronicles depended on surviving witnesses, preserved manuscripts, and consistent retelling. By guiding what traders, refugees, and pilgrims reported when they left Wakandan lands, the council could shape how distant courts understood the region. This practice did not rely on falsehood alone, it relied on omission. The most dangerous truths were not those that could be denied, but those that could be left unsaid until they were forgotten. To manage this subtle conflict, Wakanda formalized a new institution within the merchant tribe. Its members were trained in foreign languages, court customs, and the politics of memory. They traveled openly, presenting themselves as unremarkable intermediaries. Their purpose was to seed consistent narratives into foreign records. When a foreign scribe described Wakanda as an unremarkable corridor of trade routes, Wakandan agents ensured that later accounts echoed this description. When explorers returned with conflicting reports, Wakandan influence encouraged courts to favor the least remarkable version. Over time, a stable fiction hardened into accepted knowledge. This was not simple deception, it was the construction of a durable absence. Wakanda did not vanish from maps, it faded into irrelevance within them. The rise of organized religions in surrounding regions introduced another complexity. Missionaries traveled widely, seeking to convert distant peoples. Some arrived at Wakanda's borders, drawn by tales of a people who lived beyond the common reach of empires. The elders recognized that religious integration could unravel cultural secrecy more effectively than conquest. Belief systems carried rituals of confession, communal gathering, and shared identity. These practices threatened Wakanda's layered preservation of knowledge. The response was not rejection of belief. Wakanda already possessed its own spiritual traditions, centered on ancestral guidance and the Panther's communion with past rulers. Instead, the council developed a protocol of spiritual translation.
Missionaries were permitted to speak, but Wakandan interpreters reframed their teachings through local cosmology. Foreign doctrines were presented as parallel paths rather than replacements. This system allowed Wakandans to absorb ethical concepts without surrendering ritual authority. In this way, Wakanda learned to engage ideologies without allowing them to reorganize its social structure. The control of knowledge faced its greatest internal challenge during a period of prolonged peace. Without external threats pressing against the borders, younger generations began to question the necessity of secrecy. The ledger recorded fewer conflicts. Trade routes stabilized. The absence of visible danger weakened the perceived value of restraint. Some within the council argued for limited revelation, suggesting that controlled alliances could provide benefits without risk. This internal debate revealed a structural tension within Wakandan governance. The system of secrecy depended on shared belief in vulnerability. When vulnerability faded from memory, the system lost legitimacy. To address this, the elders introduced a ritual of historical reckoning. Once in a generation, the full history of near discoveries and narrowly avoided conflicts was presented to selected leaders. These accounts detailed moments when foreign armies passed within days of Wakanda's heartland, and when explorers had been diverted by chance. The ritual preserved institutional memory of danger, even when the people no longer felt it directly. During this era, Wakanda also refined its technological concealment. Early vibranium applications had been simple, integrated into tools and defenses. As knowledge deepened, Wakandan scholars learned that vibranium's energy-absorbing properties could interfere with certain forms of observation.
Structures built with layered vibranium composites distorted sound patterns and disrupted early optical devices. This discovery transformed the border tribe's approach to fortification. Rather than erecting visible walls, they constructed zones of sensory unreliability. Travelers reported strange echoes, inconsistent shadows, and disorienting terrain near Wakanda's true borders. These experiences discouraged exploration without revealing a defensive system.
The land itself became part of Wakanda's concealment apparatus. Secrecy was no longer enforced only by people. It was embedded into the environment. The Black Panther's function expanded again in response to these changes. The panther became the arbiter of historical intervention. When foreign chroniclers approached dangerous accuracy, the panther authorized subtle disruptions. A caravan might be redirected. A scholar might receive patronage to study a more distant subject. These interventions were measured and rare. Each one carried the risk of creating patterns that could be traced. The panther's training now included instruction in probability assessment and long-term consequence mapping. The role demanded patience more than force. The panther's victories were not marked by battles won, but by crises that never reached public awareness. A critical moment tested the resilience of Wakanda's systems. A powerful regional empire collapsed, releasing a flood of displaced people into the surrounding territories. The sanctuary oath compelled Wakanda to offer refuge, yet the sheer scale of movement threatened to overwhelm assimilation mechanisms. The council faced a dilemma that could not be solved by secrecy alone. They chose to act beyond their borders for the first time in generations. Wakandan agents coordinated with neighboring leaders to establish safe corridors and temporary settlements outside Wakandan territory. By shaping the flow of refugees before it reached their borders, Wakanda preserved secrecy while honoring the spirit of sanctuary. This event marked a shift in Wakandan engagement. The nation learned that its systems of concealment could be extended outward, influencing the world without revealing the hand that guided it. The quiet wars of record and shadow reshaped Wakanda's relationship with history itself. The nation no longer experienced time only as a sequence of internal generations. It experienced time as an external narrative to be managed. Each treaty avoided, each map distorted, and each belief translated reinforced a single truth. Wakanda's greatest defense was not vibranium. It was the disciplined stewardship of how the world understood and misunderstood its existence. The systems that preserved Wakanda's concealment were effective precisely because they demanded constant discipline.
Over generations, however, discipline can harden into habit. Habit can dull attention. The fracture that threatened Wakanda's silence did not begin with invasion or discovery. It began with internal strain. The institutions that governed records, misdirection, and selective engagement grew more complex as the world beyond Wakanda accelerated its pace of change. Trade networks expanded. Political alliances shifted more rapidly. New methods of record-keeping appeared among foreign courts. Wakanda's hidden ledger required constant revision to remain accurate. Errors began to accumulate, not from negligence, but from overload. The system designed to manage external knowledge approached the limits of human memory and coordination. This strain revealed a vulnerability within Wakanda's governance. The preservation of secrecy depended on small groups of specialists who carried layered truths. When these individuals aged or fell ill, their knowledge risked fragmentation. The Council recognized that oral transmission alone could no longer sustain the growing complexity of the world, yet written records carried the risk of capture. The solution was the creation of mnemonic archives. These were living repositories of knowledge encoded into ritual performance, music patterns, and symbolic choreography. Specific sequences of movement corresponded to historical events, foreign dynasties, and border incidents. The performance of these sequences trained the next generation of archivists without producing material records that could be stolen. Knowledge preservation became embodied practice. Memory was no longer only spoken, it was enacted. The mnemonic system reshaped Wakandan education. Selected youths trained in these practices developed heightened recall and pattern recognition. Their role was not to govern, but to stabilize the knowledge infrastructure that secrecy required. This introduced a new class within Wakandan society. They were not warriors, rulers, or traders. They were keepers of continuity. Their influence was quiet but foundational. When debates arose within the council, these keepers could remind leaders of distant precedents embedded within ritual memory. This slowed decision-making, but it reduced the likelihood of repeating past errors. The system revealed a deeper principle. Wakanda's power structures were beginning to rely on memory as an active, stabilizing force, not merely a record of what had been.
The fracture of silence occurred during a period of external technological transition. Foreign powers developed improved navigation methods that reduced reliance on guides. Caravans could chart routes with greater precision. The false geographies that Wakanda had cultivated began to face scrutiny. Inconsistencies between older maps and new measurements drew attention. A foreign expedition approached Wakanda's outer regions with instruments designed to measure terrain more accurately. For the first time, Wakanda's misdirection system risked exposure not through rumor, but through method. The council faced a choice. To interfere directly with the expedition would create anomalies that might be noticed. To allow it to proceed risked the slow erosion of protective fiction. The Black Panther authorized a response that revealed a new system of engagement. Wakandan scientists adapted vibranium-based technologies to subtly disrupt navigation instruments. The devices did not fail outright. They produced small inaccuracies that compounded over distance. The expedition recorded inconsistent data and concluded that the region was geologically unstable. Their findings reinforced earlier depictions of Wakanda's lands as unreliable for settlement or exploration. This intervention marked a shift from narrative manipulation to technological mediation. Wakanda began to shape not only what the world believed, but how the world measured. The boundary between concealment and influence narrowed. The success of this response carried unintended consequences. Wakandan leaders realized that they could now intervene in foreign technological systems without revealing themselves. This capability tempted expansion of influence beyond defense. Some within the council argued that Wakanda could quietly guide regional stability by disrupting tools of conquest and exploitation.
Others warned that such actions would entangle Wakanda in the outcomes of foreign conflicts. This debate introduced a new layer of ethical constraint into Wakanda's booths. The ancient promises had governed passage, sanctuary, and secrecy. Now a new principle emerged. Wakanda would intervene only to preserve balance, not to engineer outcomes. This principle was not universally accepted, but it established a boundary. Power without visibility demanded restraint to avoid becoming unseen dominion. A critical test of this boundary followed. A coalition of foreign rulers began preparations for a campaign of territorial consolidation that would destabilize several neighboring regions. Wakanda's ledger indicated that the resulting conflict would displace populations towards its borders. The council faced the prospect of either managing a humanitarian crisis or preventing it indirectly.
The Panther convened a rare council of tribes to deliberate on intervention. The mining tribe warned that disrupting foreign supply chains could reveal anomalies tied to vibranium. The merchant tribe argued that selective interference could be attributed to natural scarcity. The border tribe emphasized that any action altering the course of war would reshape how Wakanda was bound to the world. The decision that emerged was restrained. Wakanda would support regional stability through indirect assistance to neutral mediators, not through direct disruption of foreign capabilities. Aid was provided quietly to diplomatic efforts that reduced the likelihood of war. This choice preserved Wakanda's role as a hidden stabilizer rather than a silent architect of conflict. The fracture of silence did not expose Wakanda to the world, it exposed Wakanda to itself. The nation confronted the cost of memory. Each system of concealment required expansion to match the world's complexity. Each expansion introduced new ethical weight. Wakanda learned that remaining unseen did not absolve responsibility. The oaths that bound Wakanda to the outside world had grown from simple promises into layered commitments that governed how the nation shaped and was shaped by the histories unfolding beyond its borders. The pressures that strained Wakanda's systems of concealment eventually reached the borders themselves, not through invasion, but through attention. The world beyond Wakanda entered an era of intensified movement. Trade caravans were joined by scholars, healers, and envoys seeking routes between distant courts. Networks of knowledge began to form across continents, and these networks valued continuity of passage more than territorial claims. Wakanda's borderlands, long maintained as zones of inconvenience, now lay along emerging corridors of exchange. The false geographies that had once discouraged travel began to attract those who specialized in crossing difficult terrain. The border tribe reported a steady increase in travelers willing to endure uncertainty in pursuit of reliable routes. Wakanda's invisibility was becoming an obstacle in a world that increasingly prized connection. This shift forced Wakanda to reconsider the function of its borders. The ancient oaths had framed borders as filters, allowing limited contact while preserving internal integrity. Now the borders were becoming points of pressure. The council recognized that continued misdirection would require increasingly aggressive interventions, which risked creating detectable patterns. Instead of tightening concealment, Wakanda chose to adjust the gate itself. The turning of the gate was not a physical opening, but a policy transformation. Wakanda would allow the appearance of controlled cooperation at select border points, presenting itself as a modest, stable polity rather than an absent one. This did not reveal Wakanda's true capabilities. It reframed Wakanda's presence within foreign networks. The nation shifted from being unknown to being underestimated. The system that governed this shift required careful design. The merchant tribe established regulated exchange posts where Wakandan goods could be traded openly. These goods were chosen for their lack of technological signature. Agricultural products, textiles, and simple crafts formed the basis of exchange. The border tribe trained new envoys to present Wakanda as a society of disciplined agrarians and artisans, resilient but unremarkable. This presentation served a strategic function. By occupying a visible but unimpressive role in regional networks, Wakanda reduced incentives for deeper scrutiny. The world began to place Wakanda into a category that discouraged both conquest and curiosity. Wakanda became known as reliable, but not remarkable. The turning of the gate altered Wakanda's internal identity. Younger generations, raised within a system of near total concealment, now encountered outsiders more frequently. This required expansion of the Sanctuary Oath's assimilation protocols. Wakanda could no longer rely solely on dispersal and mentorship to absorb newcomers. The Council introduced structured pathways to integration that included education in Wakandan history, language, and civic duties. These pathways were designed to cultivate loyalty without revealing sensitive systems. Integration became institutional rather than ad hoc. This change transformed Wakanda's understanding of belonging. Identity was no longer defined solely by lineage or long assimilation. It was defined by commitment to Wakanda's laws of restraint and stewardship. The Black Panther's role expanded again. The Panther became the primary witness to the outside world's suffering and change. As Wakandan envoys engaged more openly with neighboring communities, reports of famine, disease, and conflict increased. The Panther was tasked with evaluating when Wakandans' restraint should yield to action. This evaluation was governed by a new system of thresholds. Intervention would occur only when three conditions aligned. The harm must be severe and systemic. Wakandan involvement must plausibly reduce harm without revealing advanced capabilities. The long-term stability of Wakanda's concealment must remain intact. This system did not guarantee moral perfection.
It provided a structured way to balance compassion with survival. Each intervention created new relationships of obligation. Wakanda's presence in the world grew heavier, even as its visibility remained limited. A significant test of this system occurred when a devastating illness spread through several neighboring regions. Wakandan healers recognized patterns in the disease that suggested environmental causes linked to mining practices beyond Wakanda's borders. Wakanda possessed treatments derived from vibranium-enhanced cultivation that could reduce mortality. To deploy these treatments openly would invite investigation. The Council authorized a mediated response. Wakandan envoys partnered with regional healers, sharing non-vibranium methods that could mitigate the illness. In parallel, Wakandan agents worked quietly to influence mining practices contributing to the outbreak. This dual strategy demonstrated a refined system of indirect healing.
Wakanda did not reveal its deepest resources. It reshaped conditions that caused harm. The outcome reinforced Wakanda's self-conception as a quiet custodian of balance rather than an unseen savior. The turning of the gate also affected Wakanda's relationship with history. The mnemonic archives were updated to encode new forms of engagement. Ritual sequences began to include patterns representing open trade, mediated aid, and structured diplomacy. Memory keepers now taught that concealment and connection were not opposites. They were alternating states within a single system of survival. Wakanda learned to move between them without losing coherence. The ancient oaths had once bound Wakanda to the outside world through distance. The turning of the gate bound Wakanda through presence without disclosure. This transformation did not resolve Wakanda's dilemmas, it redefined them. To be unseen was no longer sufficient. Wakanda had become a witness to the world's fragility. The burden of witness carried its own obligations. Each decision to engage or withhold shaped not only Wakanda's future, but the futures of those who never knew Wakanda's hand had steadied their course. The turning of the gate unfolded into an age defined not by caravans or envoys, but by observation at a distance. As foreign societies developed new methods to gather information without physical presence, Wakanda's long-standing systems of concealment faced a challenge that could not be met by misdirection alone. Travelers were no longer required to witness a place in order to describe it. Reports began to circulate based on intercepted messages, coded correspondence, and the testimonies of those who had never crossed Wakanda's borders. The world beyond Wakanda was learning to see without entering. This altered the nature of risk. Discovery could occur without trespass.
The Council recognized that secrecy could no longer rely solely on managing routes and narratives. It required the regulation of signals. Wakanda expanded its technological discipline into what became known internally as the discipline of absence. The principle was simple in statement and complex in practice. Wakanda would minimize its informational footprint. Communications with the outside world would be brief, consistent, and intentionally limited in detail. Envoys were trained to provide fewer facts than required, but more reassurance than expected. This pattern discouraged follow-up inquiry. The absence of excess detail became Wakanda's signature. Over time, foreign administrators learned that Wakanda's responses were reliable in tone but sparse in content. This predictability reduced the incentive to probe further. The discipline of absence required coordination across institutions. The merchant tribe standardized documentation used in trade to avoid revealing internal measures of value or production. The border tribe developed protocols for encounters that limited descriptive exchange. Even Wakandan art presented to outsiders was curated to emphasize cultural continuity rather than innovation. The goal was not to appear stagnant, but to appear complete. A society that seems internally satisfied invites less scrutiny than one that appears in transition. Wakanda learned to project the image of equilibrium. This projection became a defensive system. Stability, when consistently displayed, functions as camouflage. During this era, Wakanda confronted the reality that distant observation often distorts meaning. Foreign analysts lacking direct access began to interpret Wakanda through comparative frameworks. Wakanda was categorized as minor, traditional, and inward-focused. These classifications were inaccurate, but they carried protective value. The Council chose not to correct them. This choice revealed a new layer of Wakandan strategy. The nation learned to accept misinterpretation as a shield. Correcting false assumptions risked inviting deeper examination. Allowing them to persist maintained distance. Wakanda's leadership formalized this approach into what they called the law of useful error. When the world misunderstood Wakanda in ways that reduced threat, those misunderstandings were preserved.
The Black Panther's role within this system shifted toward internal discipline. The Panther became a guardian not only of borders, but of restraint within Wakanda's own culture. As Wakandan technology advanced, younger innovators sought to demonstrate their creations beyond the borders, drawn by the desire for recognition. The Panther's authority was invoked to limit outward display. This created tension between innovation and concealment. To address this, Wakanda established internal forums where advancements could be shared and honored without external validation. Recognition became inward-facing. Achievement was measured by contribution to Wakanda's resilience rather than by global acclaim. This cultural adjustment prevented the erosion of secrecy from within. The discipline of absence thus extended into identity formation. Wakandans learned to value being unseen as a form of collective strength. A pivotal incident tested this discipline. A foreign intelligence network began compiling comparative analyses of regional production capacities. Their methods relied on indirect indicators such as trade volumes, population estimates, and patterns of infrastructure development. Wakanda's modest exports and controlled integration protocols were flagged as anomalies. The analysis suggested that Wakanda's internal productivity exceeded what its trade outputs implied. This discrepancy threatened to expose the gap between appearance and reality. The Council responded by adjusting Wakanda's external economic profile. Trade volumes were increased slightly in low-risk categories, aligning outputs with plausible internal capacity. This intervention demonstrated a new system of profile management. Wakanda began to actively curate its statistical identity. The nation did not merely hide, it balanced the signals it emitted to maintain credibility within foreign analytic models. The management of distant eyes also reshaped Wakanda's relationship with time. External observation created records that persisted beyond individual encounters. Once a statistical profile entered foreign archives, it influenced future interpretations. Wakanda's ledger evolved to include not only political histories, but data shadows. Analysts within Wakanda tracked how foreign institutions categorized Wakanda over time. These categorizations were treated as variables within Wakanda's security model. When a foreign power's assessment drifted toward dangerous accuracy, Wakanda adjusted its outward signals to restore ambiguity. This created a feedback system between perception and action. Wakanda's invisibility was no longer passive. It was dynamically maintained through continuous calibration. The era of distant eyes taught Wakanda that absence itself could be structured. To be unseen required discipline, coordination, and acceptance of misrepresentation. The ancient oaths had bound Wakanda to the world through controlled presence. The discipline of absence bound Wakanda through controlled signal. The nation learned to exist within foreign awareness as a silhouette rather than a form. This silhouette carried enough shape to be recognized, but too little detail to invite conquest or appropriation. Wakanda's greatest concealment had become not the wall of secrecy, but the art of being observed without being known. Long before Wakanda chose to be hidden, it learned how to speak to the outside world without being heard. The earliest records do not describe isolation as a fear of strangers. They describe it as a learned response to catastrophe. In the age when the 5 tribes had not yet been unified, Wakanda's fills were not quiet sanctuaries, but contested ground. Trade routes passed through the region. Small caravans moved between river kingdoms to the north and coastal settlements to the east. Wakanda was known not as a nation, but as a place where strange metals surfaced after storms. This knowledge did not come from rumor. It came from merchants who carried fragments of fallen vibranium ore as curiosities. These fragments moved outward along trade paths, drawing attention from powers that did not yet know Wakanda's name, but already desired its resources. The earliest Wakandan chronicles record the first great incursion not as an invasion, but as an extraction. A warlord from the north, remembered only as M'Baku of the Stone Roads in early texts, unrelated to the later Jabari leader, led a coalition of mercenary clans to seize vibranium deposits. His campaign failed, yet it taught Wakanda something vital. Raw strength alone could not protect a secret. The land itself had to become part of the defense. After the incursion was repelled, the priesthood of the Panther cult proposed a binding law. No vibranium would ever again be carried beyond Wakandan soil in an unguarded form. This was not a moral decree, it was a logistical system. From that day, vibranium extraction became centralized under ritual authority, and every shard was cataloged, sealed, and tracked within the royal granaries. The system reduced accidental leakage of vibranium into foreign hands. Wakanda's secrecy did not begin with walls, it began with controlled knowledge. As Wakanda unified under Bashenga, the first Black Panther, this system hardened into policy. Bashenga's reign established a council of watchers whose task was not to repel armies, but to watch routes, rivers, and stories. Their work was subtle. They did not stop travelers from passing near Wakandan lands. They altered what travelers believed they had seen.
If caravans spoke of strange lights in the hills, watchers redirected them toward more believable explanations. Rare minerals that glowed faintly at night, marsh fires along the rivers, distant volcanic activity. Over time, Wakanda's presence in regional memory became diluted. The Watchers preserved secrecy not by erasing Wakanda, but by burying it beneath plausible myths. This was the first system of narrative containment. Knowledge was not destroyed, it was redirected until it lost its power to guide hostile action. The first binding oath emerged during a famine that struck neighboring lands. Wakanda possessed agricultural methods that could have alleviated suffering across the region. The council debated whether aid would reveal too much. The decision that followed shaped Wakanda's relationship with the world for centuries. Aid would be given, but only through intermediaries who would never see Wakanda itself. Grain was delivered to border communities by traders who believed the supply came from scattered hill settlements.
This arrangement created a moral contradiction that Wakanda accepted as necessary. The nation would prevent disaster beyond its borders, but would never expose its core to gratitude. The oath that sealed this policy bound the royal line to an outward-facing promise. Wakanda would intervene when collapse threatened entire regions, yet it would never claim credit or demand allegiance. This oath created a quiet form of responsibility without recognition. Wakanda became a stabilizing presence that the outside world could feel but not identify. Centuries later, as empires rose along the Nile and Mediterranean coasts, Wakanda encountered a different threat. Foreign powers developed systems of record-keeping that outlived oral tradition. Maps became tools of conquest. Envoys began to document river sources, mountain passes, and trade hubs. Wakanda's secrecy could no longer rely on altered stories alone. The response was the Veil Compact, an agreement between the royal court and the scientific guilds that formalized technological concealment. This compact did not simply hide Wakanda's borders, it restructured how Wakanda interacted with geography itself. Borderlands were reshaped to appear uninhabitable. Settlements were relocated inward. Natural barriers were enhanced through controlled landslides and managed forest growth. These were not illusions, they were ecological manipulations that redirected human movement. Wakanda's borders became zones of inconvenience rather than visible fortifications. Travelers chose other routes because Wakanda's land offered nothing but difficulty. The Veil Compact introduced a second system that governed Wakanda's engagement with outsiders: selective observation. It observed it continuously. Scouts moved through foreign cities as scholars, artisans, and traders. Their purpose was not espionage in the narrow sense of stealing secrets. Their purpose was trend analysis. They reported shifts in political ambition, technological capability, and resource scarcity. This information guided Wakanda's future interventions. When a coastal kingdom began constructing metal-hulled ships, Wakanda quietly adjusted its maritime defenses. When desert empires learned to organize large cavalry formations, Wakanda modified border patrol routes. The system allowed Wakanda to evolve in response to the world without revealing itself as a participant in that evolution. The oaths that bound Wakanda to the outside world were therefore never sentimental vows of friendship. They were structured commitments to restraint, observation, and indirect influence. Wakanda bound itself to remain unseen, not because it feared the world, but because it understood how attention transforms power into a target. The outside world, in turn, was shaped by Wakanda's quiet interventions. Regions stabilized when Wakandan grain arrived without explanation. Conflicts failed when routes became impassable. Myths replaced maps where borders grew uncertain. These were not accidents of history. They were the early expressions of a system that treated secrecy as an active discipline rather than a passive condition. By the end of the first millennium of Wakandan unification, the nation had transformed its relationship with the world into a set of enforceable patterns. Knowledge was contained through narrative redirection. Resources were controlled through centralized stewardship. Borders were concealed through ecological design. Influence was exercised through unclaimed intervention. These systems did not isolate Wakanda. They entangled it with the fate of surrounding regions while preserving the illusion of absence.
The oaths were not chains that bound Wakanda outward. They were the quiet architecture that allowed Wakanda to shape the world without being shaped by it. The early systems of concealment allowed Wakanda to endure the rise and fall of nearby kingdoms, yet endurance alone did not guarantee safety. As centuries passed, the outside world did not merely change in ambition, it changed in method. Empires learned to sustain themselves across distances. Trade networks hardened into permanent corridors of movement. Diplomatic missions began to leave records that could be preserved, copied, and compared across generations. For the first time, Wakanda faced the risk that secrecy itself might become a recognizable pattern. A land that never appeared in reliable maps, yet seemed to influence outcomes beyond its borders, invited suspicion. The Council recognized that absence, when repeated often enough, could become evidence. In response, Wakanda developed a new form of engagement that went beyond narrative redirection and ecological concealment. This was the Covenant of Unseen Hands, a binding agreement between the royal line, the war dogs, and the priesthood of Bast. The covenant redefined how Wakanda would touch the world during moments of crisis. Direct intervention was restricted to conditions where the collapse of a neighboring power would threaten regional stability for generations. Even then, Wakandan involvement would be mediated through actors who could plausibly be mistaken for local forces. This covenant did not encourage manipulation for gain, it enforced intervention for balance. Wakanda bound itself to act as a corrective weight rather than an invisible empire. One of the first applications of the covenant occurred during the fragmentation of a river confederation that controlled passage between inland regions and the coast. The confederation's collapse would have opened its people to enslavement by coastal raiders. This preparation took the form of internal education reforms. Citizens were taught foreign histories and languages, not for expansion, but for comprehension. The system ensured that if concealment failed, Wakanda would not face the world as an ignorant isolate. It would face it as a deeply informed participant. By the dawn of the modern era, Wakanda's oaths to the outside world had become layered and conditional. Secrecy remained the foundation. Intervention was refined by moral thresholds. Narrative containment was reshaped into emotional deterrence. Technological concealment became adaptive and reactive. These systems did not prevent fractures, they managed them. Wakanda's relationship with the outside world was no longer defined solely by absence. It was defined by a careful choreography of presence without recognition. The oaths still bound Wakanda to remain unseen, yet they now carried the weight of acknowledged compromise. If this journey through the hidden history of Wakanda brought you calm, and if these ancient oaths gave you a new way to see the Marvel Universe, let cozylore be your place of rest and quiet discovery. Subscribe for more gentle sleep stories from films, games, and forgotten worlds. Leave a like to support the channel, and join us again for another story whispered from the edges of legend.